James shrugged. What do you mean? I'm just an orphan. How could I possibly meet Alex Yates? Oh, come on. What about the House of Royals then? James launched into an explanation. How could I afford it? It belongs to a friend. We grew up together at the orphanage. He's out of the country and knew that I needed a place to stay, so he graciously allowed me to stay there and look after the house for him. Really? Thea still looked doubtful. Of course. Why? Planning on divorcing me if the House of Royals isn't mine. A little materialistic, aren't you? No. Thea pouted. You helped me recover and gave me a new lease of life. We're married now, and I'm your wife. Money is not a problem. I'll take care of us. Thea, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. Just then, a woman rushed over and threw herself against the car window. Her hair was a mess and her face was red and swollen. From the looks of it, she was just beaten up. The woman was Jane Whitman. Linus followed closely behind her. He yanked her hair violently and threw her against the car, hard. You *TCH. I lost my job because of you. I'll kill you. James. Henry started to say. James waved his hand. It's none of our business. Let's go. Honey. Thea looked at Jane, who was heavily injured. Worriedly, she asked, Honey, will everything be okay? James smiled at her. They're having a lover's tiff. We'd better not get involved. Thea, I'm sorry. I didn't know that you knew the chairman. Please help me. Jane fell to her knees, begging Thea. After Linus had finished beating her up, he came to the front of the car. He took out a pack of cigarettes that cost $100 per packet and offered one to Henry. Bro, no, kind sir, could you please wind the window down? Please let me speak to Miss Callahan. Henry turned around to seek permission from James. James nodded lightly. Henry wound the window down. Linus moved to the back and offered a cigarette to James. James did not take it. Linus smiled awkwardly. Miss Callahan, it's my fault for not knowing how important you are to Mr. Yates. Please do me a favor and tell him not to fire me. He took an envelope out and offered it to Thea. Here's $10,000 as a small gesture. Thea looked at James. James put his arm around her and smiled. Darling, let's go. We have to show grandfather the contract. We'll only be an official couple with his approval. Thea understood, nodding in agreement. Furthermore, she did not know Alex Yates and could not help either of them. It was their own fault anyway. Henry, let's go. Got it. Henry started the engine and drove off. Thea. Jane remained kneeling on the ground, crying her heart out. Thea ignored her. In the car, she stuck her tongue out at James, smiling mischievously. Honey, do you think that both of them lost their jobs because of me? James said, not entirely. Celestial's a huge company, and they would never allow a worker like Linus to spoil their name. With the way he was abusing his power, it was only a matter of time before he got fired. All you did was hasten things along. Thea felt relieved after hearing James say that. Soon, they reached the Callahans. Ever since the Callahans learned that Thea had recovered her looks, they had made plans for her. Tommy had even invited a friend over, planning to introduce Thea to him. His friend was Joel Xavier, a playboy who had the world wrapped around his finger thanks to the wealth of his family. Just last night, the Xaviers had suffered a major blow with Warren's death. Joel was indifferent about the whole matter. What could he do anyway? He could not bring a person back from the dead. Over the years, Warren had been in complete control of the family. He kept reducing Joel's allowance as well. Now that he was dead, Joel's father would be the new patriarch. Once his father was in control, he would be more important than ever. Furthermore, Warren's funeral was simple and the family was not in mourning. According to Tommy, Thea had recovered her looks and was a great beauty. He was here to see how beautiful she was now, given that she was so ugly before this. In the villa, the Callahans swarmed around Joel, almost like they were worshipping a god. Tommy felt important. He sat on the couch with his legs crossed, saying, Grandfather, Joel's a good friend of mine. I've told him how pretty Thea is, which is why he's here. Thea has to divorce James and become Joel's girlfriend. Lex smiled in agreement. Of course. Young Joel Xavier here is a perfect match for our Thea. The Callahans, flattery went straight to Joel's head and he reveled in it. This was what it was like being part of the Great Four in Kensington. Everywhere he went, there were people waiting to butter him up. Grandfather. Just then, Thea entered with James. As soon as she was in the house, she produced the contract. Happily, she said, "Here's the contract with Celestial Group. Does this mean that James can stay?" Tommy bounded to his feet at once and pointed to Joel, who was sitting on the couch. "Thea, let me introduce you to Joel Xavier. You know who the Xaviers are, right? The leaders of the Great Four. Why don't you light a cigarette for him?" Joel almost started drooling at the sight of Thea. He had known Thea before when she was disfigured. Now that she was beautiful again, she looked just like a goddess. It looked like the trip to the Callahans was well worth it. Thea was much more beautiful than all the other women he had fooled around with. He swore that he would get Thea into bed. Thea glanced at Joel. His stare was making her extremely uncomfortable. "Who is he? I'm not lighting a cigarette for him." "Watch your words," Lex said coldly. "How could you speak to Joel like that? Apologize at once." Joel waved a magnanimous hand. "Mr. Callahan, don't berate Thea. I love the stubborn ones. Also, what was that about getting an order from Celestial?" Tommy hastened to explain. It was then Joel noticed James, who was standing behind Thea. He had thought that James was the driver. Who knew that he was Thea's husband, handpicked by Lex? His expression darkened. "Mr. Callahan, I want Thea. Annul the marriage immediately. Otherwise, all it takes is one phone call from me and the contract with Celestial will be void. Don't forget that the Xaviers are Celestial Group's closest business partner. We get the lion's share before the orders are distributed among the other businesses." James barely glanced at Joel. "I heard that Warren Xavier is dead. You're a Xavier, no? Why are you here instead of mourning at home?" FCKU. Joel straightened up and grabbed James's collar, raising his hand to slap him. James blocked the slap. Gently, he pushed Joel away. Even though James had barely used any strength, Joel still stumbled, falling onto the couch. That only made him angrier. He was part of the Great Four, used to everyone worshipping him. Now, this nobody was pushing him. Worse, who was he to mention his late grandfather? Everyone knew about Warren's death, but no one dared mention it. Except for James Caden. Joel produced a switchblade and threw it onto the ground. Coldly, he ordered, "Cut one of your own hands off and I'll spare your life. Otherwise, I'll kill you myself." Tommy stood up, grinning widely. "Joel, come sit down and have a cigarette. Calm down. It would be too easy to get rid of this piece of trash. Don't hold back on our account. Even if he dies, no one would care once he's dead. Thea will be yours." Thea was furious, her teeth grinding. Joel sat down and gave James a death glare. "For what you said earlier on, you're dead. No one will be able to save you." James smiled, ignoring all of them. If they were not at the Callahans, Joel would be dead by now. Thea passed the contract to Lex in a subdued manner. "Grandfather, we did what you told us to. If we could get an order from Celestial, you'd acknowledge James as my husband. This order isn't just worth 30 million. It's worth 100 million. Please take a look." "What? 100 million? Lex was shocked. "Grandfather, you've got to hear this." The chairman of Celestial Group invited Thea to his office personally. Just then, a girl stumbled into the room, her expression disbelieving. The girl was Tommy's younger sister and Howard's daughter, Megan Callahan. As soon as she entered, she noticed Thea and James. She could not help staring at them. She then approached Lex and showed him an article on her phone. Lex saw an image of Alex bowing to Thea, his arm outstretched. He was gobsmacked. That was Alex Yates, the chairman of Celestial Group. In Kensington, even the Great Four had to play by his rules. He snatched up the contract on the table and confirmed that it was indeed an order for $100 million. He burst out in laughter. "Ha ha, excellent job, Thea. You're a Callahan through and through. It's time for Eternality Group to shine. What about James, grandfather?" "What? Joel Xavier is here." A middle-aged woman walked in. It was Gladys, Thea's mom. She noticed Joel as soon as she entered and made a beeline for him, a big smile on her face. "You must be Joel. I've heard so much about you. What do you think of Thea? If you want her, she's yours." "Mom." Thea was so angry she stamped her foot. Looking at Lex, she almost burst into tears. "Grandfather, we did what you asked. We've got the order, and you have to keep your word." HMPH. Joel looked disdainful. "So what if you've got the contract? As I said, all it takes to void this contract is one phone call. How dare you?" Thea pointed at Joel angrily and looked at Lex, pleading with him. Grandfather. Lex put the contract down. He did not know why Alex Yates had dealt with Thea personally. Then again, there was no denying that Celestial Group were close partners with the Xaviers. If they offended Joel, they could lose the contract. Furthermore, it was Thea, not James, who obtained the contract. Puffing on his tobacco pipe, he said, Thea, you obtained the contract. It has nothing to do with James at all. I stand by my decision. Divorce James and marry Joel. That's right. Joel looked smug as if he knew that he had won. Once Thea was his, he would find a way to get rid of James. He did not believe for a second that Lex Callahan would offend him for a nobody like James. If they offended him, the Callahans would have a hard time. Gleefully, Joel said, a smart choice, Mr. Callahan. My dad is about to become the head of the family. If you make me happy, you'll get all the orders you want. Honey. Thea looked at James tearfully. James looked at her, asking, what do you want, Thea? Firmly, Thea said, we're married now. I'm your wife. Unless I'm dead, we're not getting a divorce. James nodded and said, call Alex Yates and explain the situation to him. Let's see if Joel was being truthful when he said he could void the contract. If Joel has that much power, then I think you'll be happier with him. At any rate, it's better than staying with a poor man like me. The Callahans looked at James with some admiration. Lex smiled. James, you're a smart man. Don't worry. I'll keep my word. After the divorce, I'll pay you $500,000. Thea did not know what James was thinking. She was worried that James felt like there was no other choice. She held onto James's hand tightly. Honey, don't worry. I'll make sure you get to stay. If they try and throw you out, I'll kill myself. Call Alex Yates. Okay. Thea took out her phone and Alex's business card. Just as she was about to make the call, Gladys snatched the phone out of her hands. Enough of this nonsense. This piece of trash has agreed to the divorce. Why are you still so stubborn? What good could possibly come of staying with him? Joel is so much better. Joel waved a hand, not having a care in the world. Let her make the call so she'd give up. Thea, ask if Celestial wants to work with the Xaviers or the Callahans. Gladys obliged and passed the phone back to Thea. Joel looked as if he had already won. The Callahans were only a second-rate family in Kensington. There was no way Celestial would give up the partnership with the Xaviers. The call connected. Mr. Yates. It's me, Thea Callahan. We signed a contract earlier on. Yes, it's me. Joel Xavier said that he could void the contract that I just signed with you. In Alex Yates' office. Alex was furious. He shouted, Joel. Which Joel? Joel Xavier. No one has the authority to void a contract that I signed. The Xaviers, Megatron Group. Joel also asked if you'd rather work with the Xaviers or Callahans. Thea spoke in a small voice. The Xaviers were part of the Great Four after all, and the Callahans were a second-rate family. Okay, relax, Thea. Let me check and I'll call you back right away. Sure. Thea hung up. Joel looked smug. How did it go? Ads by PubFuture. Thea said, Mr. Yates said that he'll call me back. After Alex hung up, he conducted an investigation immediately. He had never cared much about the company's partnerships. The vice president usually handled it. He summoned the vice president, learning that Celestial had just signed an agreement with the Xaviers, Megatron Group, which allowed them first dibs on orders. Walton, you're fired. Pack your things and get lost. Alex ordered the business department to cancel all the orders with Megatron. From now on, Megatron would never get any of their orders. Once he had made the necessary arrangements, he returned Thea's call. Hi, Thea. I've figured out everything. We've cancelled everything with Megatron. From now on, Eternality Group gets first dibs on our orders. Would that please you? Thea's phone was on loudspeaker. Everyone heard what Alex said. They were in shock. Joel was the only one laughing. Thea, who did you call? He's bold, isn't he? What's this about canceling everything with Megatron and working with Eternality? Only a fool would make this choice. Did you pay someone to pretend to be the chairman of Celestial? Joel spoke loudly and the loudspeaker amplified his voice. Alex heard everything clearly. He lost his temper. Joel Xavier, yes. From now on, the Xaviers are finished. After that, he lowered his voice and said, Thea, don't worry about the orders. No one would be able to cancel them. The Xaviers gave you trouble, Hold on. I'll take care of it immediately. The Xaviers will go bankrupt within half an hour. Alex hung up. Then, he issued a string of orders. I don't care what you do. I want the Xaviers to go bankrupt within half an hour. Alex Yates was the chairman of Celestial Group. Even though he hailed from the capital, he was still a powerful man in Kensington. If he wanted the Xaviers to go bankrupt, it would be done. James looked pleased with the turn of events. Looking at Thea's confused expression, he smiled. Thea, I think Mr. Yates is quite fond of you. Are you his goddaughter? Joel looked bored. How could the Xaviers go bankrupt within half an hour? What a colossal joke. Just then, he received a call from his father. You little B*****. What did you do? Celestial has cancelled the partnership with Megatron. Joel was at a loss for words. Joel slumped to the floor. Celestial had cancelled the partnership with Megatron. How was this possible? Did Thea call the actual chairman of Celestial Group? Looking at Joel, James knew that Celestial had cancelled their agreement with Megatron. In the director's office at Megatron Group, Mark Xavier was busy yelling at Joel. Celestial had told him that this had come straight from the chairman. Joel had offended someone extremely important. Sir, Celestial said that the quality of our medicine is compromised. They're suing us for $3 billion. Sir, the bank demands we pay off our loan right now. Sir, one of our factories has been shut down by relevant authorities over a possible quality breach. Sir, our shareholders are selling off their shares. Our share price is falling. We've lost millions of dollars. Sir, Megatron has gone bankrupt. All our businesses are affected. Many of them have been shut down and are being investigated. Mark, still scolding his son on the phone, almost passed out. Joel heard everything over the phone. He knew that Thea had called the real Alex Yates. He had kept his promise, causing the Xaviers to go bankrupt within half an hour. His entire body was drenched in sweat. Thea, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please call Mr. Yates again and tell him to stop. Please, I'm begging you. All the Callahans were stunned. Thea was a little confused as well. Alex had said that he would make the Xaviers go bankrupt. It had barely been half an hour, and it was done. He was an efficient man, Alex. The Xaviers were the leaders of the Great Four, but they had gone bankrupt within such a short time. The chairman of Celestial Group was one not to be trifled with indeed. Lex knew that the days of the Xaviers were over, while the days of the Callahans were just about to begin. He ordered, security, throw Joel Xavier out. 2 security guards appeared and dragged the kneeling Joel away. Thea, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please give me and my family another chance. The sounds of Joel begging faded away. Lex urged Thea to sit with him. Come, Thea. Sit, don't stand. Thea was the heroine of the family now. Thanks to her connection with Alex Yates, their glory days were just beginning. Lex issued a decree. From now on, Thea will be the executive chairman of Eternality Group with a monthly salary of $300,000. Thea took a moment to respond. Really? You're letting me be the chairman with a salary of $300,000? Of course. What about James? Since you want him, he can stay for now. Thea was overjoyed. She stood up and grabbed James's hands, looking like a little girl. Honey, you can stay. James smiled. As long as Thea was happy, he was happy too. After all, he had sworn to make Thea the happiest woman on earth. All of Kensington was in shock. Last night, Warren Xavier died. Today, the Xaviers went bankrupt. The leaders of the Great Four were no more. Falling from grace, they were now a family laden with debt. At the Xaviers. Ads by PubFuture. Within a day of Trent's return, the family had gone entirely bankrupt. In the foyer, Joel was kneeling on the ground. Uncle, it's Thea Callahan's fault. She called Alex Yates and he cancelled the partnership. He made us bankrupt. Joel cried as he told the story, exaggerating as he saw fit. Crack. Trent broke the glass he was holding. His expression was dark as he said, Alex Yates. How dare you go against the Xaviers? Your family will not be able to protect you. Thea Callahan, your family will perish. Calmly, Rowena asked, what should we do now, Trent? Trent stood up and said, don't worry. I have a plan. Good things come to those who wait. The Xaviers were mourning several losses while the Callahans celebrated. Lex made a public announcement about Thea taking on the role of executive chairman. From then on, Eternality Group was Celestial Group's most important business partner. Coupled with the news that Alex Yates had invited Thea Callahan to his office personally, the Callahans' social status skyrocketed. Many people tried to curry favor with them. James was finally recognized as Thea's husband, moving into Thea's place. As the executive chairman, Thea left the house early and returned late every day, busy running the company. James stayed at home being a house husband. He cooked. He cleaned. When it was time, he picked Thea up from work on an electric motorcycle. He felt like he was living his dream life. 2 weeks quickly passed. One day, James swept the floor and took the trash out. Then, he rode his motorcycle to Eternality's office, ready to pick Thea up. At the roadside outside Eternality Group's office, James squatted by the road, smoking a cigarette. Henry did the same. "James, don't you find it boring? All you do is cook, clean, and pick Thea up. I'm not even doing it, and I'm bored. What if we take Thea to the Southern Plains? What do you know? This is what it means to be truly living." James took a long drag and blew a smoke ring before throwing the cigarette butt on the ground. Casually, he said, "I've had enough of the killing and violence. Thea is the only important thing in my life now. I want to stay with her for the rest of my life and make her as happy as possible." "Oh, right." Henry looked like he had just thought of something. "The Xaviers may be bankrupt, but it won't be so easy to get rid of them. They still carry a little weight in Kensington, especially Rowena. She still has friends in high places. I did a little digging and found out that she will be organizing an auction tonight. They are planning to raise some funds and make a comeback. I believe that many of the items they'll be auctioning were taken from the Cadence, including moonlit flowers on Cliffside's edge." James's face darkened. Henry sensed the shift in James. The temperature around them plummeted. Moonlit flowers on Cliffside's edge. James muttered to himself. That painting was his family's most important heirloom. Before his grandfather died, he told James that their family could be wiped out, but that painting was the one thing they could not lose. It remained in James's mind, even after 10 years. "Get ready. We act tonight." "Understood." Henry nodded. "All right, you should leave. My wife's about to get off work. She doesn't want me to be around knaves and hooligans, and it's obvious from your appearance alone that you're not a good guy. If my wife saw you, I'd be in for another lecture." Henry's expression fell. He was just slightly darker skinned. Why does that make him a hooligan? Why would that make him a bad guy? Don't just stand there, get lost. James sent a kick his way. Henry turned and left. James glanced at the time. Thea's work had ended. She would be coming out any moment. He pushed his electric motorcycle along and made his way to the Callahans' Eternality Group. Before he could approach the entrance, however, he spotted a woman walking out of the building. She was 5'10", clad in formal business attire that consisted of a white button-down shirt, a black pencil skirt, and red heels. Her chestnut-colored wavy hair framed her face, and the way she walked with a briefcase in her hand conveyed a powerful confidence about her. "Thea." A man walked up to her at that moment, holding out a bouquet of flowers. "These are for you, Thea. Are you free tonight? I've booked a private room in the Drunken Ferry tonight. I'd love to take you out for dinner." This man was Brandon Fraser, of the Frasers, one of the Great Four in Kensington. Ever since Thea obtained Celestial Group's order list and her apparent friendship with Alex Yates, the chairman of Celestial Group, was exposed, the Callahans' fame grew exponentially. Thea, too, became the most beautiful woman in Kensington. She was also highly competent as chairwoman of Eternality. She managed to put the company in order in just half a month. Thanks to her growing fame, she was crowned Kensington's prettiest chairwoman. Even though she had a husband, James was virtually unknown. The heirs to wealthy families ignored his existence and continued pursuing Thea in hopes of eventually winning her over. At that moment, Thea spotted James and his electric motorcycle. She flashed a stunning smile, ignoring Brandon as she made her way toward him. She kissed James, then hugged his arm affectionately. "Honey, that person told me he booked a private room in the Drunken Ferry and wants me to have dinner with him. I haven't been to the Drunken Ferry before. He invited you. You should go. Take me with you, too, if he's okay with that. I've never been there before, either." Brandon's expression turned sour at the scene. He marched over to them. "James Caden, I'm Brandon Fraser, he said coldly and held out a card. I'll pay you $500,000 to leave Thea. Do I accept it, darling? It's up to you, Thea said, an amused smile playing at her lips. I think you should, though. You'd be able to reserve a table at the Drunken Fairy with that much money. I'll take it, then. James gave Brandon a smile as he accepted the card. So, what's the PIN number? Brandon turned his nose up at James. 6 zeros. Take the money and get lost. From now onwards, Thea will have nothing to do with you anymore. Yep, we'll go get our divorce sorted right now. James nodded. Hop on, darling. Thea sat on the motorcycle's back seat and wrapped her arms around James's waist. They then drove away under Brandon's bewildered gaze. Brandon stared after them for a few minutes before realizing he had been fooled. He threw the bouquet of flowers he had been holding onto the ground, glaring after James, now far in the distance. You little. This isn't over. He shouted angrily after him. James drove Thea home on the motorcycle. Once home, Thea sat on the couch and held out a hand, grinning at James. What? James said, gripping his pocket. I was the one Brandon gave the divorce fee to. This is my private savings. Divorce your foot. Give it. Thea pouted, then continued, I pay for your food, your drinks, your amenities, your clothes. What do you need money for? I'll save the money for when we have kids. They're expensive, you know. James reluctantly handed Brandon's card over. But this keeps happening, my dearest. Adding up all the money everyone's given me to break up with you in these 10 days, there'd be more than $2 million by now. That money's mine. What money? The voice came from the door. Nothing, Thea said hurriedly as she hid the card. Gladys walked over to them. Since when did you learn to lie to me, you little brat? I heard everything. Divorce fees, $2 million, hand it over. Mom, it really was nothing. Thea protested. James nodded. It was nothing. Gladys shot him a glare. I'm talking to my daughter. This is none of your business. Look at the time. Shouldn't you be making dinner? Go on, then. Okay. James headed to the kitchen and started cooking. After 30 minutes, food was finally ready. They all sat down for dinner. James pulled Thea into their room when they were done eating. You didn't actually tell her, did you, darling? Thea shot him a look. It was all your fault, speaking that loudly. Mom took all the money. Said it was payment for raising me all these years, since I now have a job. What? James stared wide-eyed at her. You gave her everything. He was indeed short on cash recently. He had been unemployed ever since joining the Callahans, and now he was completely broke. Even his cigarettes were bummed off of Henry. Yeah, I had to, Thea said helplessly. The $100,000 from Astor, $250,000 from Bertrand, $300,000 from Oswald, and $500,000 from Fraser. Mom took them all. James sighed. Hopefully another rich guy comes and offers me several $100,000 again to break up with you. Send me some cash, darling. I'm too broke to even afford cigarettes now. I don't believe you. I saw a black card in your pocket the other day while doing your laundry. Don't tell me there's nothing in it. Give it here, I'll keep it for you. Thea held out her hand, waiting for James's card. James took it out. It was a matte black card with a glossy black dragon on it. There was no card number. Thea had merely glanced at it while she was busy with laundry, but now that she was looking at it, she was confused. What kind of card is this? Why aren't there numbers on it? Well, James hesitated. This card is linked to every major bank, so I can use it anywhere. Also, it has an ID chip in it, so there's no need for numbers. This is the 21st century, after all. Thea pocketed the card, half convinced. What's the PIN number and how much is in it? PIN number's 8 8s. As for how much is in there, not much. 8 your foot, Thea retorted. Pins aren't 8 numbers long. Sorry, it was 6 8s, James said with a sheepish smile. That card required no PIN. Any number would work. That black dragon card was the only one in existence. It served as proof of his identity and power. As for the money it contained, he was truly ignorant of the amount, since he had never used it. However, since this card was the result of his 10 years of service and honor, there would probably be quite a large sum inside. It was just that, now that he had climbed so high up, money meant nothing to him, so he never cared about the card. Thea could have it. Without her, there would be no James, and there would be no card. Thea was the one that gave him everything he had. James pouted helplessly. Get me the dress from my closet, Thea said, ignoring him. There's an important banquet tonight. James stood and walked toward the closet. Which one, dearest? He asked, opening the closet door. The white one, with the V-neck. That won't do. You can't expose yourself in public like that. This one looks good. James grabbed a black, high-neck dress and handed it to Thea. Oh, right. What's the banquet for? Rowena Xavier of the Xaviers is hosting an auction banquet. There'll be lots of great items there, so almost everyone that is attending will be famous in one way or another. I'm going to expand my network while I'm there. James paused when he heard that, but recovered immediately. Need me to give you a ride? He asked. I'll take the cab. Oh, okay then. Thea left after changing into her dress. James left soon after, giving her family a random excuse as he did. In the Xaviers' villa. The Xaviers had one remaining villa left. All their other assets had been liquidated, including real estate. The Xaviers were gathered inside the building. Sat at the helm was a middle-aged man clad in military uniform. He was Trent Xavier, Warren Xavier's fourth son. Trent was a soldier on the western border, which meant he was on a mission when Warren died and had not been able to leave. When he finally managed to rush back home, it was already too late. However, the murderer left a clue. They were a remnant of the Cadens that had fallen 10 years ago. So, he rushed to the capital overnight in search of the man in power that had ordered the extermination of the Cadens and the retrieval of moonlit flowers on Cliffside's edge, in hopes of having his questions answered. Alas, his efforts were fruitless, save for one piece of news. The reason why Thea Callahan became disfigured was because 10 years ago, she was afflicted with burns while saving someone from the Cadens' villa. The man in power ordered an investigation into who Thea Callahan had saved. With that news in hand, Trent left the capital and returned to Kensington. When he finally got home, however, he discovered that the Xaviers had been bankrupted. Thea Callahan, too, had played a big part in this. A beautiful woman sat at his side. Her skin was virtually flawless, and she seemed to be ageless. This was Rowena Xavier. Trent, father's killer may be a mystery, but Thea Callahan was the one that bankrupted us. Joel told us Alex Yates only tore us down because of that woman's call. Trent's expression darkened as he clenched his fists. No one gets away with making enemies of us, not even Alex Yates, he growled. I'll show the world that our family aren't pushovers. No. Tonight, the Callahans fall. The Xaviers' banquet auction was held in Kensington Hotel. Outside, luxury cars lined the entire road, and celebrities milled about the building. These were all people Rowena had invited. Although the Xaviers had been bankrupted and people were reluctant to attend this banquet auction, the news that Trent Xavier had returned convinced them otherwise. Trent had contributed greatly to the Xaviers' rise in Kensington, since he was a soldier on the western border and was quite high up on the ranks. Two men in black trench coats approached the Kensington Hotel. Henry paused for a moment at the military presence outside the building. Hey, James, these are Western soldiers. Does that mean Trent Xavier is back? I'm pretty sure he's the Blythe King's confidant. His rank's pretty high, too, as the deputy commander. The Blythe King. James scoffed. Even if he were here tonight, I'll have him kneel before me if he dared get in my way. The 5 commanders were famous in Saul. The Black Dragon of the Southern Plains, the Centurion of the North, the Blythe King of the West, the Barbarian King of the East, and the Emperor of the Capital. In terms of influence, the Emperor was the strongest. Yet even though the Black Dragon had been general for the shortest amount of time, he was the strongest in terms of raw power. Even if the other commanders all came at him at once, they might not be his match. Besides, the Black Dragon had another title, Asclepius, God of Medicine. His medical skills were unparalleled, able to revive even the dead. He could even stop death's side in mid-swing. As long as someone had even half a breath left in them, he was able to save them. That was why James saw no threat in the other 4 commanders, let alone a mere confidant of the Blythe King. Will we be getting rid of anyone tonight, James? The priority tonight is getting the moonlit flowers on Cliffside's edge back. As for whether anyone ends up dying, we'll see. When do we enter? There's no rush. We'll go in when the event starts. Understood. Thus they lingered outside the hotel. The celebrities attending the banquet were apprehensive at the sight of the soldiers. standing guard in the hotel. Trent Xavier really was back. His father was dead, his family bankrupted. Now that Trent was back, it was as if a storm had rolled into Kensington. The celebrities had all gathered on the top floor of the hotel. Even Thea had arrived. The black dress she wore accentuated her slender figure, and her tied-back hair lent a graceful and elegant air about her. She mingled with the star-studded crowd, expanding her personal network like she had wanted. Ads by PubFuture. At that moment, two workers suddenly dropped the painting they had been carrying just as they walked past Thea. Crash! The painting fell to the ground, shattering the crystal case it had been transported in. A shard cut into the painting as the damaged part landed by Thea's feet. What the hell was that? A worker stared at the shattered glass and sliced painting on the ground, then glared up at Thea. Why'd you bump into me? What? I didn't, Thea said, confused. She hadn't even touched him. I really didn't. Did you mistake me for someone else? No way. I only dropped it because you bumped into my arms. Do you even know what this is? It's moonlit flowers on Cliffside's edge. It's over 2,000 years old. It's been valued at $1.8 billion. The other worker joined in, pointing at Thea. This was your fault, Thea Callahan. You did this. A crowd started gathering at the commotion. What's going on here? A middle-aged man clad in military uniform barked. What's with all the yelling? Have you forgotten how you're supposed to act in front of guests? Boss, we were transporting the moonlit flowers on Cliffside's edge when Thea Callahan knocked it over. It's been ruined. Trent knelt down and frowned at the slash on the painting. Moonlit flowers on Cliffside's edge. It really is ruined. This costs $1.8 billion. No, it wasn't me, Thea said frantically as she backed away, balking at the hefty price. There was no way she would be able to afford that, not even if she liquidated everything her family owned. Trent stood up and glanced indifferently at her. I won't falsely accuse anyone. This place is fitted with surveillance cameras. We'll know the truth once we review the footage. Bring it here. A few minutes later, someone brought the footage over. Trent played it for everyone present. In the video, the workers walked past Thea, but dropped the painting when Thea bumped into one of them. With that, Trent looked coldly at Thea. $1.8 billion, Thea Callahan, he said, then turned to his men. Take her away. Have someone visit the Callahans for the money. If they can't cough it up, bring them all here. Thea held back tears at the soldiers approaching her. It really wasn't me. It wasn't me, General Xavier. I didn't do it. I didn't knock it over. The crowd had grown considerably by now, but no one spoke up, content to merely feel pity for Thea. What a pity. They just started rising up, too. They're doomed now though. Yeah, $1.8 billion. They're definitely going bankrupt. Would they even be able to get that much after selling everything? Thea was unlucky, I guess. That was careless of her. The color drained from Thea's face as she heard the chatter and watched as the soldiers approached her. She stumbled backward but stopped as she stared down the pitch-black barrels of their guns. Take her to the back room, Trent commanded. In desperation and helplessness, Thea struggled vainly as the soldiers dragged her away. The crowd watched on in shock, but none of them sympathized with her. In fact, some were secretly entertained by the entire scene. This incident had no effect on the event. At that moment, Rowena Xavier appeared to announce the start of the auction. Outside the Callahans' villa, dozens of jeeps screeched to a halt as the soldiers that had ridden them here charged onto the Callahans' home. Panic erupted amongst the Callahans. Lex, who had gone to bed, got up again and approached the soldiers in his pajamas. What's happened, sir? He asked the leader frantically, his face pale. Take them. With their order issued, two soldiers grabbed Lex by his forearms and dragged him away. The others, still groggy from sleep, were also forcibly pulled into the jeeps. Meanwhile, a loud bang erupted from Thea's home. Benjamin and Gladys were awoken suddenly as soldiers filed in and dragged them away. Kensington Hotel basement. Thea sat tied up on the ground. Soon enough, her family was also brought in. Her grandfather, Lex Callahan, her father, Benjamin Callahan, her uncle, Howard Callahan, her second uncle, John Callahan, and everyone else. No one had been left out. All of them had been tied up, too. They looked at each other in panic and confusion, not knowing what they had done to offend the Xaviers, or why they were now in a basement. Trent sat on the only chair in the room, taking a drag of his cigarette. Do you know why I brought you here, Thea Callahan? He asked, his expression cold as the soldiers behind him looked on. She did not. She knew she was nowhere near the workers when the painting fell, so why did the surveillance footage show otherwise? General Xavier, we haven't done anything against your family. In fact, our Tommy is good friends with Joel Xavier. Why are you doing this? Please, let us go. Lex shuffled in his restraints as he pleaded with Trent. If we did do something to offend you, I promise I'll personally make it up to you. Trent held up a hand, cutting Lex off. Thea Callahan destroyed a painting that was worth $1.8 billion at the auction banquet. I'll release you now so you can liquidate your assets, Lex Callahan. Get me the money in exchange for the rest of your family. They die otherwise. What? $1.8 billion. What the hell happened, Thea? Ads by PubFuture. How did you destroy a painting worth that much? The Callahans, shocked, furious, and still tied up, started hurling insults at Thea. They accused her of being a curse upon their family, and how she had always been nothing but trouble for them. Thea, struck speechless by their insults, was unable to get a word out. Release Lex Callahan, Trent ordered. Trent had investigated the Callahans' fortune before he took action. Adding all their assets up, the Callahans were worth $1.3 billion in total. This one painting was enough to bankrupt them entirely. Lex walked up to Thea as soon as he was released, then slapped her with all his strength. Useless thing. You've ruined our family. We're doomed. Tears flowed down her swollen red face. It wasn't me, grandfather. She cried out. It really wasn't me. How dare you argue? Would General Xavier falsely accuse you of this? Lex shouted, slapping her a few more times in rage. He knelt before Trent after he was done. Please have mercy on my family, General Xavier, he pleaded desperately. Mercy, Trent said coldly. Did you give mine any mercy when Alex Yates started bankrupting us because of a phone call from Thea Callahan? Realization dawned on Thea. You set me up. Yes, Trent said. It doesn't matter if you know. You can't do anything about it. I'm getting that $1.8 billion from you, one way or another. I'm the deputy commander on the western border. Wiping you out will be easy. Lex slumped to the ground, his energy leaving him completely. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a single instance. We're doomed, he wailed in despair. The Callahans are doomed. Toss the old man out of here. Yes, sir. Two fully armed soldiers dragged Lex, still sobbing, out of the room. The other Callahans watched on, frozen in horror. General Xavier was completely serious. The Callahans were doomed, and it was all because of Thea. Thea Callahan, you wicked little b*tch. You did this to us. Ads by PubFuture. Why didn't we abort you when we could? This is your own fault. Why are you dragging the rest of us into this? General, I have nothing to do with Thea. Please let me go. Sob. I don't wanna die. General Xavier, please let me go. Thea was the one that crossed you. Just get your revenge on her. Kill her and let the rest of us go. The Callahans kept pleading. There was nothing else they could do against the mighty Trent Callahan. Hearing her own family's spiteful words, Thea's will to live shattered. She passed out from overwhelming emotion. Trent waved an arm, and one of his soldiers dumped a bucket of water on Thea. She sputtered awake. Trent stood up and approached her, a dagger in his hand. He lifted her chin, sliding the blade lightly across her fair cheek. Thea, he started in a cold tone. 10 years ago, you broke into the Cadens estate while it was burning down and were injured. But I see you've regained your beauty. Now, tell me, the person you saved from the fire, where is he? I don't know. Thea trembled, her face pale. Trent slashed the dagger across Thea's cheek, and bright blood flowed an instant later, dyeing half her face red. Ah! Thea cried out in pain, struggling to break free. Her limbs were tied up, however, and her efforts were in vain. The other Callahans shook in fright, the more cowardly ones passing out at the sight of blood. Speak. Who did you save? Did he come find you? What is your relationship with Alex Yates? Why does he respect you that much? I don't know. I don't know anything, I swear. Thea sobbed. Another slash. Another wound appeared on Thea's face, but all she felt was a hot sting, then warm fluid once again running down her cheek and neck. Who did you save? Trent roared. Did he come for you? Thea was dumbfounded, even through her fright. She truly did not know who she saved 10 years ago. She started crying, her tears stinging on her wounds. I don't know. I swear. I didn't even know that was the Caden's estate I ran into. I only found out about that later. I don't know who I saved. His face was burnt beyond recognition when I pulled him out of the fire. He jumped into the river and got washed away. I don't know who he is. He's never come for me, General Xavier. I'm telling you the truth. Please have mercy. The two cuts were a stark contrast to her otherwise fair skin. Blood kept flowing from the wounds, dyeing her neck red. Her vision turned misty as crystalline tears welled up in the corners of her eyes, falling and mixing with her blood. She had fallen into despair. Faced with General Trent Xavier, all her helplessness and hopelessness piled up. More than anything, hate swelled up within her. She hated that she ran into that fire because she heard someone calling out for help. She may have saved one person, but the injury that had been inflicted upon her cost her 10 years of torment. 10 years of pain. She became the laughingstock of the entire school when she got those burns. Even the friends she was once close with wanted nothing to do with her. Her classmates treated her like a bringer of plagues, avoiding her as much as they could. Her family started hating her. Even her own parents treated her like she was worthless. When her scars were finally healed, she had thought that maybe those 10 years of suffering were worth it, after all. But now, she was once again in the throes of despair. Please, General Xavier. This has absolutely nothing to do with us. It's all Thea's fault. Yeah, it's all her fault. Torture her if you want, just please let us go. Thea stared up at Trent's expressionless face and listened to the Callahans push her onto the proverbial train tracks, also they themselves could live. She fell deeper into despair. Not talking, are you? Trent waved a hand, his expression turning cold. Immediately, two men walked up to him. Sir, take her to the auction hall. I want everyone in Kensington to know what happens when they cross my family. We'll deal with Alex Yates after getting rid of the Callahans. Yes, sir. The men untied Thea's restraints, then dragged her out by the hair like it was a dog's leash. Thea was only wearing a thin dress. It ripped under the friction between her and the ground. Her skin was rubbed raw as she was dragged to the auction hall. Her wounds sent sharp sparks of pain through her every time they made contact with the ground, but the men ignored her wailing pleas for mercy, no matter how loudly she screamed. Back on the top floor of the Kensington Hotel, the auction was proceeding as scheduled. None of the items they had put up were worth anything, yet their starting bids were high, at least 10 times higher than what they would be worth normally. Most of the attendees were notable figures in Kensington. They were all well versed in business proceedings and immediately caught onto what was really happening. Alex Yates had bankrupted the Xaviers, but Trent Xavier had returned to gather funds, intending on building his family back up. The attendees had no choice but to bid. Trent was the general of the western border. He had immense power, and crossing him was the last thing any of them wanted. So, they kept bidding, even when they knew what they were bidding on were fakes and forgeries that were worth nothing, because they knew the alternative would be Trent Xavier getting payback on them for not buying anything tonight. Another item was brought on stage as soon as the last bid was complete. It was Moonlit Flowers of Cliffside's Edge. The beautiful auctioneer started her spiel. The following item is for Moonlit Flowers on Cliffside's Edge. The starting bid is 8 million, bidders must bid no less than $500,000 every time they make a bid. The crowd understood what happened when the painting resurfaced. That painting Thea had destroyed was also a fake. The Xaviers just wanted an excuse to take the Callahans down. Rumors had spread that the reason why the Xaviers went bankrupt was because Thea Callahan had called Alex Yates and put him on speaker. So Alex heard what Joel Xavier had said and bankrupted the Xaviers out of spite. The true painting was worth a fortune. $1.8 billion would be a fair starting bid for it, yet now the Xaviers had offered a fake one for $8 million. This was a clear scam. I'm representing the Frasers. We bid $10 million. I'm getting that painting. I'm representing the Zimmermans. We bid $11 million. I want that painting. I'm representing the Wilsons. We bid $12 million. They knew it was fake, but in order to get on the western border General Trent Xavier's good side, some of the wealthier families started bidding in earnest. Soon enough, the forged Moonlit Flowers on Cliffside's Edge went from being worthless to having a hefty price tag of $12 million, with the biddings showing no signs of slowing down. Eventually, the forged painting was finally bought for $21 million. Just as the crowd was waiting for yet another item, two fully armed men dragged a woman on stage. Her hair was disheveled and blood caked her face. One of her high heels was missing, and she had friction burns on her knees. Blood continued flowing freely from her cuts. The crowd drew in a cold breath at the scene. Thea was finally released once she arrived on stage. They had positioned her so she just so happened to be facing the crowd. 10 people sat at the auction stand. They were all big names in Kensington, but the sight of Thea's bloodied face terrified them. Their faces went pale as they sat frozen in their seats, not even daring to breathe too loudly. "Help! Help me!" Her hope renewed as she spotted the numerous people around her. Thea reached out to them like a drowning woman to a straw, calling out to them for help, but no one moved. They lacked the courage to even speak since the fully armed men stood between them and Thea. Trent walked on stage with his dagger. He yanked Thea's head up by her hair, placing her face in full view of the audience. "The Xaviers are the true rulers of Kensington. Anyone that crosses us must die." With that, the dagger once again sliced through Thea's cheek. "Ah!" Thea's face contorted in pain as she wailed. "Kill me. Just kill me, I beg of you. Stop torturing me." Thea's body and soul were exhausted from the torment. All she wanted was release. Thus, she kept begging for him to take her life and be done with it. James and Henry had been waiting outside the hotel. When it was almost time, they donned the masks they had prepared and approached the hotel. They went through the back door, where there were no soldiers standing guard, unlike the heavily guarded front entrance. James and Henry made their way to the top floor, but before they could enter the auction hall, James heard Thea's pained cries and desperate pleas. His heart started pounding as he saw red. Rage surged from deep within him, consuming him whole. Henry had been trailing after him but froze when he sensed James's hostility. He instinctively took a few steps backward, trembling with unwarranted dread. In all the years he had been working for James, he had only seen him this furious once. A year ago, a great battle erupted in the southern plains. Tens of thousands of men in the Black Dragon army were wiped out tragically in the hands of the enemy, caught in a trap the other side had set up. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, James had rushed into the enemy's stronghold alone. During that battle, blood flowed as freely as a river. During that battle, corpses were piled as high as a mountain. During that battle, James claimed the head of the enemy's leader and brought it back to their base. At that moment, Trent Xavier slid his dagger to Thea's throat. "I'll give you one last chance," he said coldly. "Who was the person you saved 10 years ago?" The door burst open with a loud boom. "It was me." James's roar, filled with malice and bloodlust, resounded through the hall. "It was me." It was just 3 words, yet it resounded through the hall like crackling thunder and rang in the attendees' ears, shaking all thoughts from their minds. Even Trent, still on stage, was stunned. He was a battle-hardened deputy commander of the western border. He had fought hundreds of battles alongside the Blythe King himself, yet James's roar froze him completely, rendering him unable to react for an instant. When he was finally able to move, he spotted a man walking into the hall. The person donned a black ghost mask, and a chill emanated from his body. This chill seemed to penetrate throughout the entire hall, lowering the temperature by a few degrees. "That's him. That's the person in the ghost mask that killed Warren Xavier." The celebrities finally reacted, their faces growing pale in shock and terror as James walked past them. They remembered the gruesome image that had happened only half a month ago, when William Xavier's arm was yanked off, and Warren Xavier was decapitated, his headless body falling into a pool of his own blood. "You." Trent's expression darkened. He knew the ghost mask this man wore. He had seen it on their surveillance footage, when this man murdered his father. The remnant of the Cadens. Trent stared at James, who was still approaching him. He may have been a battle-hardened deputy commander, with over 100 battles under his belt, but the bloodlust he felt from this man was nothing he had ever experienced. James's face was obscured by the mask, his blood-red eyes the only thing that was exposed. Henry, who had been following James, spotted the bloodied Thea on stage, her shallow gasps for breath the only indication that she was alive. His heart started pounding. He knew then that there was about to be a massacre within this hall. He had worked under James long enough to know what his temper was like. There were only 2 things James cared deeply about: the comrades that fought alongside him, And the girl who saved him from that inferno, his savior who had been on his mind ever since that fateful day. James had given up on eminent glory and honor for Thea Callahan. If he kept that honor, he would likely have become the head of the 5 commanders in the future. Yet Trent had dared torment Thea like this. Dragons had lamellas. Touch them, and death would be assured. Thea was James's lamella. Trent was a dead man. No one could save him now. Even if the Blythe King stood before them, he would be cut down if he dared make an attempt to stop James. The big hall was completely silent. James and Trent made eye contact. Trent's battle-hardened body trembled slightly under James's gaze, and sweat beaded inexplicably on his forehead. James reached behind him and pulled out a length of incredibly thin wire. His hand tightened around the wire, made of silver needles, and walked slowly to the auction stage as the crowd watched silently on. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of his wide leather toe box shoes echoed rhythmically throughout the hall, startling the audience with every step he took. His footsteps grew heavier, becoming akin to an earthquake by the end, even managing to shake the tables and chairs. Black. Trent's face contorted in horror as he spotted the silver needle wire in James's hand. There was only one person in this world capable of using silver needle wires for battle. Only one. Swish. With a flick of James's wrist, the wire split instantaneously. Silver needles exploded towards Trent, embedding themselves accurately between his brows. They then flew back to James. Once again converging to form a thin wire, now stained red with blood. Trent died without even getting his last words out completely. The only thing he felt in his death was a deep regret. He spotted a wire in the surveillance footage, but it was too far away for him to identify what it was. If he had known, he would never have dared mess with Thea Callahan, even if he was given all the courage in the world. This was the Black Dragon. The legendary Black Dragon of the Southern Plains, one of the 5 commanders, on par with his superior. Yet he knew that even though they were of the same rank, not even 10 Blythe Kings would win against one Black Dragon. Trent fell over slowly as the horrified crowd watched on, unable to even yell out in pain. Thea laid on the stage. In her daze, she spotted the person wearing the ghost mask. The owner of the mask approached her. She tried to clear her hazy vision so she could memorize the mask, but she had lost too much blood. Her mind was engulfed in a fog as she passed out. Just before unconsciousness claimed her, she felt a pair of strong arms pick her up. Leave not even a single member of the Western Army alive. As for the Xaviers, leave them untouched. I'll show them what true despair is, because that's how they're going to die. James's voice resounded clearly throughout the hall as he walked out with Thea. The fully armed soldiers stared stunned at their dead deputy commander, trembling with fear as they stood around the platform. With his order received, Henry marched over to them, his windbreaker flying open as he reached into them, pulling out his throwing knives. Swish swish. The knives flew towards their targets, and 2 of the western border soldiers fell, a pool of blood forming beneath them. Henry made his way backstage, but the fight ended almost instantaneously. Every western border soldier fell to the ground before they could even start to react. The large venue once again fell silent. The Kensington celebrities were now cowering on the ground, their heads buried in their arms as they stayed as still as they could. 10 minutes passed before some of the more courageous attendees stood back up, taking in a shocked breath as they saw the bodies of Trent and the other western border soldiers lying in pools of their own blood. As for the other Xaviers, they were too shaken from their fright to speak. At that moment, they were overcome with terror. They remembered how the man said he was going to show them true despair, that was how they were going to die. Someone finally reacted and called the cops. Soon, some police arrived. They found the kidnapped Callahans and released them, then secured the parameters and started questioning and taking down statements. Kensington was the capital of medicine, contributing to 80% of the world's medicine. Here, there were pharmaceutical companies worth billions, as well as thousands of medicinal processing factories whether big or small. Pharmacies were everywhere, whether on big roads or tucked away in small alleys. 9 Dragons Street was a messy, complicated street in the heart of Kensington where crooks gathered. There were antique stores, bars, pubs, and massage parlors. At one end of the street stood a clinic. Common Clinic. Henry had found asylum here. As James was a doctor, Henry had picked up a few things from him over the years. He was adept at treating the flu, colds, and minor injuries. On the mini operating table at Common Clinic. James looked at Thea, whose face was bleeding. Her knees were scraped and her flesh was embedded with bits of debris. She had been gravely tortured. As she lost a lot of blood and was exhausted, she fainted. James had a scary, blank look. Cradling Thea's face, his hard expression cracked, revealing a hint of shame. Tears welled in his eyes and started dripping down his face. He had promised never to let Thea get hurt again. He had failed. He owed Thea so much that he would never be able to repay her this lifetime. He refused to think about the consequences had he been just slightly late. Even killing Trent did little to abate his anger and hatred. He would make the Xaviers pay in worse ways for what they did to Thea. He grabbed a medicine kit and started to clean the wounds on Thea's face carefully. "General Xavier, it wasn't me. I didn't do anything. Please let me go." James accidentally touched her wound, causing Thea to shout. She curled up in a fetal position, trembling slightly. James felt like he had been stabbed. He choked up, almost crying again. Quickly picking up a syringe, he jabbed Thea with it. It would keep her calm and numb her wounds, minimizing her pain. Thea finally relaxed. James cleaned her wounds carefully, applied some medicine, and bandaged them. Henry had returned, but he stood out of the way, knowing better than to bother James. James dressed the wounds on Thea's face and legs before carrying her to the little house behind the clinic. He placed her on the bed and covered her with a blanket, holding her hand tightly. He never left her side. Henry stood guard at the entrance, not moving either. All of Kensington was in shock. In an attempt to rebuild their empire, the Xaviers had set a trap. They auctioned off cheap items at sky-high prices, managing to raise a substantial amount. Trent Xavier even went after the Callahans. No one could have expected the man in the ghost mask, Warren Xavier's murderer, to make another appearance, killing Trent at the venue. The police had launched an investigation, but as Trent Xavier was an important person, other relevant authorities were roped in as well. No one had any other updates after that. Quietly, the night slipped away. The sun rose, shining brightly on the world. The citizens woke up, got ready, and started a brand new day. In the morning, the chairman's office, the Celestial Building. "Mr. Yates, something major went down last night." A beautiful, sexy woman stood next to Alex, recounting what happened at the Xaviers' auction yesterday. Trent Xavier kidnapped Thea and her family. Alex was stunned when he heard this. He followed up with, "Did Trent die in the end?" "Yes, sir. According to news sources, Trent was going to take the Callahans out before coming after Celestial." Before he could do anything to Thea Callahan, a man in a ghost mask appeared. "He's Warren Xavier's murderer, and he killed Trent too." Alex waved a hand. "That's enough." His secretary left. Alex smiled grimly. Mumbling to himself, laying a finger on Thea is like courting death. What good is a deputy commander of the western border? Even the Blythe King of the West has to yield to the Black Dragon. Alex had never cared much about the Xaviers or the Callahans anyway. At Common Clinic. After a good night's rest, Thea woke up. When she came to, a pair of strong hands was holding hers. She felt boneless and limp. She wanted to get up, but her face burned. She screamed. James was holding Thea's hands tightly, having fallen asleep at the side of the bed. Thea's shouts jolted him awake. Anxiously, he said, "Darling, you're awake." Hearing a familiar voice, Thea asked weakly, "Jamie, where am I?" James replied, "You're at Common Clinic. It belongs to a friend. Your family was in trouble yesterday. Everyone had been kidnapped. I was lucky enough to evade capture, quietly following them to Kensington Hotel. When I got there, I saw you lying on the road outside, so I brought you here." James did not want Thea to learn his true identity. Thea was just a normal person. If she found out, she would be greatly affected. All he wanted was for Thea to experience a worry-free life. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." James blamed himself for what happened. Thea remembered what happened last night, feeling wronged. She cried. "Why? Why me?" Last night, she felt completely hopeless as she was tortured. Looking into Trent Xavier's face, she had felt hopeless and helpless. She prayed and begged for him to let her go, but he only cut her face up slowly. She broke down and started crying in earnest. James squeezed her hands tightly, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have gone with you." He kept apologizing. He had let her down. If not for him, Thea would not be in this situation. Thea got sick of crying, or maybe she was exhausted. Her sobs grew quieter and quieter, and she finally fell asleep. Only then did James let go of her, heading out. James. Henry, who had stood guard all night, produced a cigarette and passed it to him, saying, "All the Western Border soldiers in Kensington Hotel have been taken care of according to your instructions. I left the Xaviers unscathed. I've investigated, and the moonlit flowers on Cliffside's Edge painting at the auction is a fake. I've interrogated Rowena Xavier as well. The real painting disappeared from the Xaviers' place 10 years ago. As for where it is, Rowena doesn't know. Only Trent knows, but he's dead now." James lit the cigarette. Moonlit flowers on Cliffside's Edge was the Cadence family heirloom. Grandfather valued it more than his own life. No matter where it was, James had to retrieve it. He had no time right now, though. Thea had just been through a great ordeal. Now, he had to stay with her and make up for his mistakes. Henry paused before saying, "There's something else. The military regions of North Kensington, South China, Ocean City, and Coastal Heaven will be merging as one. The Blythe King of the West has been assigned away from the western border to take on the role of Commander-in-Chief of the 5 armies, effective today. It was documented this morning." James did not care. Mildly, he said, "None of my business. James, based on your victories, the role belongs to you. What does the Blythe King have to do with it?" Henry felt like this was very unfair. James only waved a hand, saying, "That's enough. Forget about it. None of this has anything to do with me." James did not want to prolong the conversation any further. He said, "Send me some money. I'm getting breakfast for Thea." Henry said, "I'll Venmo it to you." James left the clinic, buying some chicken noodle soup on the street for Thea. When he returned, Thea was awake. Her face was bandaged in gauze. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling listlessly. James went to her and put her breakfast down. Softly, he called, "Darling." Thea did not respond. James took her hand in his. "It's over now. It's all over now." Thea turned to him slightly, sobbing softly. Her body trembled, a panicked expression on her face. I've offended Trent Xavier. I'm a dead woman now. Go, leave me. I don't want to get you into trouble." James soothed her. "It's all right. I saw the news this morning. Trent's dead, and your family is okay." "What? He's dead?" Thea was shocked, looking at James in disbelief. Trent Xavier was a general. How could he be dead just like that? James said, "News reported that a man in a black ghost mask killed him. The police have launched a hunt for the murderer." Thea was stunned. A man in a black ghost mask. She vaguely recalled that a man in a black ghost mask had appeared just as she was about to give up, but she blacked out before she could take a good look at him. "He's dead. He's really dead." Thea looked as if she was in a trance. She could not believe that a man as powerful as Trent was now dead. "That's right. Come on, have some soup." James scooped Thea up, propping her against him. He picked up a spoon and started to feed her. Thea parted her mouth slightly, swallowing the soup. Thea was on edge all day long. She fell into periods of deep sleep, but nightmares plagued her, jolting her awake frequently. Every time she woke up, she screamed for Trent to let her go. James knew that Thea had been through a lot, being on the brink of a complete mental breakdown. She would need time to heal from this traumatic experience. Everyone was talking about the Xaviers and discussing Trent's death. Not James. He stayed by Thea's side dutifully. On the first day, Thea was barely conscious. However, thanks to James's meticulous care, Thea slowly recovered. From being silent, she learned to open up to James again. James swore that he would heal her. If he could do it before, he could do it again. 3 days later, Thea completely healed. She was no longer traumatized. However, her face was still injured. Her wounds had not recovered yet. "Jamie, it's been days. I want to go home. Mom and Dad might be worried." "Okay." James nodded. Henry took them home. At the entrance of Thea's house, the door was closed. With James's assistance, Thea approached the door, knocking on it softly. Soon, a middle-aged man opened the door. Seeing Thea, he was ecstatic, pulling her into the house anxiously. "Thea, you're home. Are you all right?" "Dad," Thea said. "I'm fine." "Who's there, Benjamin?" A voice rang out, and Gladys appeared. When she saw Thea, her face darkened. Coldly, she said, "You cursed girl. Why are you here? Mom. Don't call me Mom. I have no such daughter. She looked disdainfully at Thea, whose face was heavily bandaged. Gladys was kidnapped and treated horribly because of Thea. Luckily, Trent was dead. Otherwise, the Callahans were goners. After Lex returned, he flew into a rage. He issued an order, stripping Thea of her position and casting her out of the family. He even made a public announcement that Thea was no longer a Callahan. Gladys, what are you doing? Benjamin frowned. Dad may have cast her out of the family, but she's still our daughter. Gladys planted her hands on her hips. Coldly, she said, who dare go against the old man's orders? Don't forget that you're living off Eternality's salary. If we make the old man angry again, you might lose your job. Without a job, how are you going to pay the mortgage? After that, she pointed at Thea. Go. Leave. I have no such daughter. You're a curse, a jinx. Your dad is looked down upon in the family because of you. Look at Howard and John. Even their children possess some of Eternality's shares. They enjoy a good life just living off the dividends each month. Gladys got more and more agitated, finally slamming the door in Thea's face. Thea's eyes misted over and tears started rolling down her cheeks. She knew she was a disgrace to her family, especially her parents. However, she did not expect that her parents would bar her from their home. She knelt at the door, begging, Dad, Mom, I'm sorry. Please open the door. James was heartbroken. He tried to pick her up and comfort her. Thea, why don't you get up? It's their loss, not yours. Thea remained kneeling on the ground, refusing to get up. She kept crying and knocking on the door. The door opened again. Gladys tossed some suitcases out unceremoniously. Get lost. Leave. A man in his mid-20s appeared this time. Well-dressed and handsome, he said, Mom, Thea's been through enough. You can't turn her away just because grandfather has stripped her of her position and cast her out of the family. James is a poor, retired soldier. He has no job and no money. If you don't take her in, where will she go? It was Thea's younger brother, David. He was working at Eternality Group as well, but he did not usually live here. After he got married, he bought a house downtown. As the family was in trouble, he returned temporarily. Mom, please don't turn me away. Thea knelt before Gladys, tugging on her pant leg. Get lost. Gladys kicked Thea away. Gladys shut the door with a slam. James helped Thea stand. She was still crying. He wiped her tears and cradled her face. Darling, let's go to the House of Royals. My friend won't be back for a while. We can stay there for now. We'll return when Dad and Mom are feeling better about the whole thing. However, Thea refused to listen to whatever James had to say. She just felt hurt and sad. At the same time, she blamed herself. She blamed herself for being a disgrace, causing her parents to lose their social standing in the family. She buried herself into James's chest, crying her heart out. I'm useless. I'm a disgrace. I hate myself. Why did I run into the fire all those years ago? I regret it. I regret it so much. Thea only ended up in this situation because she ran into the fire 10 years ago. If it were not for that incident 10 years ago, her life would be completely different. James's heart twisted hearing what Thea said. His guilt bubbled to the surface. Hugging a crying Thea tightly, he apologized to her over and over again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, what about grandfather? We could still talk to him. Thea, who was still crying, came to a sudden realization. She tugged on James's arm, saying, let's talk to grandfather. He loved me the most when I was young. He would never cast me out. We can beg him to take me in. She grabbed James, pulling him behind her. Looking at Thea's tearful face, James's heart twinged. He said, calm down. Let's go to the villa now and speak to him. Yes, let's go now. Thea had just escaped Trent's clutches. Coupled with being cast out of the family, she was at risk of having a mental breakdown. Foolishly, she thought that she would be welcomed into the family again after talking to Lex at their villa. However, he was the one who cast her out in the first place. James had no choice. He had to calm Thea down and ensure her emotions were stable before deciding what to do next. He did not want to take her hope away, so he brought her to the villa. Soon, they reached the entrance of the villa. Thea rang the doorbell and started pacing anxiously. The door opened after a while. It was Tommy, Howard's son. Ads by PubFuture. As soon as he saw Thea, he started yelling, "Thea! Callahan, you jinx! You're still alive. What are you doing, coming back here?" Smack. James slapped Tommy. When Thea's mom was scolding her, James restrained himself out of respect as she was an elder. However, Tommy was in no position to rebuke Thea. James's slap was powerful, causing his face to redden immediately. He even spun around in a circle before falling to the ground. Tommy lost his senses for a few seconds. His ears started buzzing. A few seconds later, he collected himself and reacted. Getting up and pointing at James, he shouted, "How dare you hit me? I'll kill you." Tommy raised his fist, ready to hit James. "What's this?" Lex approached, leaning on his cane. He was wearing a blue suit. Sternly, he said, "Why are you causing such a ruckus? Is there no order in the house anymore?" Tommy looked chagrined, grumbling, "Grandfather, James hit me. How dare he? After all, this is our home." On the other hand, Thea fell to her knees, a pleading expression on her face. "Grandfather, please don't cast me out. You brat." Lex fumed when he saw Thea. It was because of her the entire family was almost wiped out. He raised his cane with the dragon head, about to strike her with it. At the last second, he held back. Pointing outside, he roared, "Thea, you've been cast out of the family. You're no longer a Callahan. Leave. I never want to see you again." Lex's words were a shock to Thea. Thea crumpled on the floor, her eyes welling with tears. James helped her up and guided her away. Thea was in a state of shock. After they left the villa, she looked at James, starting to cry again. She felt like she was the unluckiest woman in the world. James hugged her in an attempt to console her. "Don't cry. If you want to go home, I'll come up with something. I promise that your family will be begging for your return before the end of the day." "Ah, my life is terrible," Thea cried. Over the past 10 years, she had been humiliated and ridiculed, but not once did she cry. All her repressed emotions came bubbling to the surface all at once. Henry was following them at a distance. James gave him a look and he brought the car over. James helped a heartbroken Thea into the car. They did not return to the House of Royals, but to 9 Dragon Street where Common Clinic was. Once Thea exhausted herself from crying, she fell asleep on the bed. James went outside and called Alex. "Alex, it's me. Ah, Dragon, Mr. Caden." Alex shivered in fear as he answered James's call.